Hé Matakiapi, Lampe Tukile, Iu Hachande, Washe Nape Chiziapi. Imachiapi, Wakia Tuampi Io Yampawi. Imachiapi, Chante Makilawi. Miwashichi Chajekile, Candi Brings Plenty. Imataha Nahecha Ocheti Shakoi, Amataha Hé Sapa na Mini Wachoni. Mini Luzaha, excuse me. I would like to greet each and every one of you with a handshake from my heart. My name is Candi Brings Plenty. My Lakota name is Bright Lightning Woman, and I am here in Ocheti Shakoi territory in the Sacred Black Hills in Rapid City, South Dakota. I am the Indigenous Justice Organizer and lobbyist for the ACLU South Dakota, and I am also here as the West River office in South Dakota. I am excited and elated to be here to initiate our first Wakalapi Talk with President Kevin Killer, or Senator Red Dawn Foster, and Natalie Stites Means, the founder of the Hé Sapa Voter Initiative. And today we have a panel and we have a topic that has yet to be discussed. I myself personally have not seen any public views on the overturn of the Roe v. Wade from an Indigenous lens or an Indigenous World View. So today, our topic is Indigenous justice and abortion access. With that said, I will definitely give some time here to allow each of our panelists to introduce themselves.
I can start. I bring greetings from the Oglala tribe and our president's office. Sorry, it's a little bit pixelated. We usually have our meetings in this room, so good to see you, Candi, and thank you for the conversation today. It's just good to be in this space with you all.
This is Red Dawn Foster, Senator for District 27. Thank you, Candi, for organizing this, and I am appreciative to be on this panel.
Hello, relatives. My name is Natalie Stites Means. I am a enrolled member of the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe. My Lakota name is Woawachi Suntawi, and I'm pleased to have this important conversation with you all today. Thank you.
Let me thank you each and every one of you. We will just dive right into these questions. And as I stated, today the Wakalapi Talk is our first initiative to bring the voice of an Indigenous perspective from the folks who are most impacted, especially here in South Dakota. Our first question, I definitely would love to hear from each of you and your personal worldviews as Indigenous folks and community leaders. What does the Roe v. Wade look like through an Indigenous worldview?
I know that our vice president did put out a statement about the Supreme Court ruling, and it was interesting because when that statement came out, we were looking at ways and actually had conversations with different healthcare organizations and all that, and seeing what their process was. And then literally, a few days later, we had the Oklahoma versus Castro Ureta decision. It was 5-4, and which really limited some aspects of those conversations and really caused us to re-examine how some of this looks. Right now, it's still kind of in a legal gray area, but but I think there's still opportunities around having this decision. But it just goes to show you, how fast things can change, from one week to another week, and especially when working with tribes and the complexities of some of these conversations. But that's kind of where we're at right now, and we're still examining this. But that's kind of where we're at.
I will say that the overturning of Roe v. Wade is an affront to women everywhere, and from an Indigenous perspective, my teachings are that Lakota women have always had the knowledge to address our health needs, including whether or not we would bear pregnancy, and that particularly during times of war or famine or other challenges to the camp, that we did not, engage in unfettered reproduction. Our Lakota family planning was spaced out appropriately to accommodate the resources around us and to ensure that we could care for and love the sacred being coming into our lives. Family planning also, spacing your children 4 years apart as well. And even limiting the number of births for any one, woman. So that's my understanding of our traditional perspective and ways, and that Lakota women have always had the choice of whether or not we bear children. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. So Red Dawn Foster. And I think that it's also important, in addition to what Natalie had mentioned, is that we do, as Indigenous folks, we look at our children, our little sacred ones, and having that centered into conversations of family planning, making sure that when we bring children into this world, that we're prepared to care for them, and that they are going to not only just survive, but flourish. And I think that with the Roe v. Wade and the history of forced sterilization of Indigenous women, I feel that it's very important that we look at it through that lens of the U.S. government having or feeling that they have jurisdiction over our bodies. And, decisions of family planning are very private, personal, community, family decisions, and should not fall under the jurisdiction of the government. And so I know that with our history, that's something that we need to really be concerned about, is that them just extending their jurisdiction into our most private aspects of our life.
Candi, let me add in here, because I think both Natalie and Senator Foster bring up really good points, and it's almost to the same principle that Natalie mentioned. Letting women, especially women, speak on this issue. Like Native women, because I don't think the voices are heard enough. And when I was in, it made me think back to what Senator Foster was saying. I spent literally 8 years on the Judiciary Committee in the House, and almost every single year some kind of bill would come up, and so I think one of the things that to help put this in context is seeing how long a lot of these the long game, I guess, around a lot of these decisions, and literally from when I was 29 to about 38. That's almost 8 years and 2 years in the legislature. 2 years in the Senate, but that was 10 years, that of resources poured into not only South Dakota but other states of looking at how do they fight these decisions and how do they pour resources in and all that. And partly is electing people are going to stand up. Literally, both my colleague and I, both Democrats. We always oppose those bills, and my colleague, she was from eastern South Dakota, and we just always kind of stood firm on that, but still we were outnumbered. Usually it was a 15-member committee, and usually some of those votes went down to 13-2 or 12-3 and all that. But at the same time, it's just making sure that you kind of understand how much resources are poured into a lot of this stuff, and not to kind of, get away from the topic, but to kind of, put this all in context, is that there's a similar case coming up that's going to be coming in fall that deals with ICWA. And again, another case that has to deal with, family planning, choices, all this kind of stuff. But it kind of shows you how all this kind of, blends together and is really going to make a big impact. And even the ICWA, all the amount of resources that are poured into that through different foundations on I believe like some conservative foundations, they've been chipping away at this for a long time. So whether it's women's choice issues or ICWA or sovereignty, you always got to be prepared as Native communities, and especially let our Native women speak on a lot of these issues, because first and foremost they experience this. And we need to find ways to back them up. So thank you.
Thank you. Every one of those are absolutely important perspectives from an Indigenous lens, as well as Indigenous justice information that absolutely should be highlighted. Thank you for that insight. The next question: can you explain tribal sovereignty? And second, how can tribal sovereignty play a role in accessibility to clinical abortions? You can definitely start this question just defining tribal sovereignty, because it is a huge opportunity, and also something that our wider audience is yet to learn about. And if you can, definitely share and define tribal sovereignty.
That's going to be kind of hard to do it in, but just real quick, I think it's just looking at the history of the Supreme Court and its involvement in tribes, because even before that, we were always, I think we thought of ourselves as sovereign nations. We were dealt with that by, the English government, the European governments, the French government made treaties with us, and British government made treaties with our tribes. And, and then as we kind of expanded out westward to, out this way in the 1800s, it started to get defined. And I think it's up to tribes too, to kind of figure out, where do we want to be on this spectrum and assert our sovereignty where we can. But, again, as the recent Supreme Court decision, showed tribes that, even though that case was in Oklahoma, it really expanded, right now it's still in a legal kind of gray area, but for most of the interpretation of that, it did give states somewhat of a way of a path in to interfere with that sovereignty. So again, that's why we got to be careful on some of these issues, but at the same time, we need to figure out how do we give safe healthcare to Native women, and making sure that we're always protecting them and they have options, because at the end of the day, this is about, sovereignty of people's bodies, honestly, and making sure that we protect that right. And, whether it's man or woman or two-spirit, however they feel, that's what we need to figure that out and protect that sovereignty. Because first and foremost, and I think that's, we always kind of adhere to that as tribal nations of protecting our people.
Well, Bila Tonka, I'm definitely open to hearing anyone else who wants to talk about how they see tribal sovereignty, or how tribal sovereignty can play a role in accessibility to clinical abortions.
I would like to say that a lot of the social media and even mainstream media, we saw an article on CNN, was speculating as to whether or not reservations would be a safe harbor for the establishment of abortion, providing health clinics. And I think that, number one, my first response to that is, if it were so easy, we would have done it. We'd be doing it right now as Indigenous women in our tribal homelands. Obviously, there are a number of significant legal, regulatory, policy, funding issues, as well as socio-political and cultural issues that are in play. And I won't speak to Oglala business on this matter, but we do have the example of former President Cecilia Fayeth under her impeachment. And I think that it was definitely at least, an inhibitor to the type of work that is, that our women are in dire need of. South Dakota has had a dry run basically on the absence of abortion rights for some time during the COVID pandemic. The one clinic in Sioux Falls that provides that was shut down and did not provide any type of abortion services. And we have roughly a little over 600 abortions performed, mostly for married people, and a lot to address the health and survival of the mother herself. And I would note that, that the Hyde Amendment and the federal jurisdiction ends up playing a strong role in terms of, how the Indian Health Service responds to the healthcare of women. And certainly, as Professor Stacy Leeds said in the initial response to Roe v. Wade being overturned, is that our number one issues are forced sterilization and the fact that we've had to file lawsuits against Indian Health Service to access Plan B and other birth control methods. And I would say that birth control in general is difficult to access in terms of vasectomy, and other types of, procedures that may help us manage our family planning.
Wopila Tonga, that is extraordinary input that definitely needs to be heard by our allies and non-Indigenous folks. We have 2 more questions, and the next question is there a history of tribal nations implementing their tribal sovereignty against federal laws?
I guess, I think Natalie referenced that earlier, at least within South Dakota. And to my knowledge, I know that it's always been on the periphery, I think, of these different nations, and really this is, the good thing about it is it's forcing the conversation about how do we protect and how do we, monitor and how do we look at, who's the most vulnerable in our populations and how do we protect their, their rights as people. I think, one of the things that was brought up earlier is that, the risk planning methods we have, one of the things that I learned is that, as Lakotas, we didn't name our children until the age of 5, because we didn't know what was going to happen. And it was being practical and it's also being logical about the situation, and understanding that there was methods in place that helped, with determining the families. And so I think that's something that, using the historical nature and really examining that and trying to, recontextualize that into the 21st century and where we're at now is going to be helpful and helping guide this conversation. That's one of the elders that I used to work with all the time. That's what she said, old is new, and just really trying to figure out how do we, how do we use those methods that we had in place, and again, standing strong around just the concept of sovereignty over people's bodies. I think that's probably the, at the core of it, that's what we're getting to, because, as a Native man and someone who's, sat through those hearings when I was the only Native person in the room for 10 years. I mean, I didn't see any other Native people in the room. And to have those conversations, it was pretty frustrating, and just to make sure that we can just be present at all spaces. So I'm glad that you're having this conversation, because it also prepares us to, where are they going to plan next? And it's always making sure that we're on guard for all these areas where they have opportunities to put some of these ideas out. Because if you think about it, in reality, that this actually came through states. It didn't come from a federal decision. It actually came through states, goes up all the way to the Supreme Court, and it affects us somehow. That's how effective that law is. So it's, again, we need to look at some of the stuff they do on their side, and apply that to ICWA, apply that to sovereignty of women's bodies. And just making sure that we're always, being strategic about our decisions.
Thank you very much. That was, absolutely hearing from your perspective. I have not taken that into consideration of what that would be like, especially as a lobbyist. Going to the legislative session here in South Dakota for me has been on the other end of the spectrum from what I'm used to after working the legislative session in Portland. But to be, that's exactly why I'm so grateful for our Indigenous legislators presently, because we continue to see the growth and what that looks like and bringing these discussions to the surface. Senator Red Dawn or Natalie, if you have any more insights.
So I think this is where it becomes very interesting. The recent U.S. Supreme ruling on Oklahoma versus Castro Porta is that that law states that the state now has jurisdiction over non-tribal members, and it's unclear how that will be applied, if that's against non-tribal members who have committed a crime against a tribal member, or how that will actually play out. But I can anticipate that there will be some sovereignty issues with if there's non-natives coming to the reservation and trying to access any type of family planning from the reservation, from within the reservation borders. So it's just interesting to see that. And I also anticipate legislation to that effect through the state.
Overall, I think that we need to highlight that the Congress has plenary power over Indian affairs. And I think that we need to consider our power, our authority, our influence in Congress at that level, but that we also, like President Killer and the senator have remarked, is we need to prepare and be just as organized at state levels and at local levels in order to counter these crucial human rights issues that we are seeing play out with Roe v. Wade, with Castro. What we know is that Indian women and our families and our partners and the Two-Spirit community, that all of us are less safe. And that's period. We are not safe in our bodies, and we are not safe legally. And I think that we do need to issue a call to arms and a call for unity to address these setbacks in strategic ways, and in ways in which that match and counter the opposition. Because this is not just a nice discussion at a table. They are doing this to dominate, win, and to seize power over our bodies, over the government. And we need to be effective in how we counter that. I think all of us need to be prepared that Brackeen, which is expected to be reviewed in October, is not going to go the way that our tribes want it to go, but that Indian child welfare itself, the act, of course, came out of Congress, and it is a congressional law with congressional appropriations. And we also have state level Indian child welfare legislation that we need to strengthen and pursue. And I think this, again, goes to the very safety of our bodies, the very safety of our children, and it goes to the future of Indian nations. We, as the Ocheti Shankomi tribes, have several thousand children in child protection or some version of that foster care system. And, we need to think about what that means for the future of our tribal nations. Strategy, tactics, unity, all of those things need to be in play because our families are under attack. And if the people are just realizing that, they need to join forces with those of us who have been sounding this call for quite a while now. Thank you.
Natalie is exactly right. I think that we do need to look at this case in a wider scope of how there's just a lot of changes that are happening that limit individual freedoms and collective freedoms. And I think that the ICWA case that will be heard is everybody, every single person needs to be following that and concerned with that, because it is said that there are forces utilizing our children as a mechanism to undermine our tribal sovereignty. And so what can we do as individuals, as people bringing children into this world, looking at our foster care system? How can we be proactive in that? Those of us who can maybe be foster parents, hearing the urge that we do, like there are a lot of children in that, Native children that are in that system that are these families. And so looking at this at a much wider scope of how we can strengthen ourselves as a community and the tribal level, that sovereignty, because it is under attack.
Thank you so much. Yes, and that leads us to our next question, and I will ask the question, and after we hear our updates on the legislative, what that's going to look like for the legislative session, I will leave some time and space for some closing comments from each of you. So with that said, our last question is, what does the upcoming special legislative session look like ahead, and what are the possible outcomes?
So we know that there will be a special legislative session, and I can anticipate, and President Killer may be able to add to this as far as his experience, I can anticipate a lot of bills coming through the legislation that will further limit access to reproductive rights in South Dakota, as well as possibly seeing legislation from the state that goes on to tribal land regarding non-natives. So those are just some things that I'm anticipating. We're doing research and looking. I do not plan on bringing anything from protection, because I feel that it wouldn't, it's not going to pass. And I think that right now we need to be, unfortunately, we're playing defense and need to be prepared to do that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm grateful that this panel in itself is part of that motion to create awareness and to start the conversations, and for all the updates and insights that each of you have brought today. With the closing here, I would like to offer each of you time to say a closing statement, or discuss something, or offer a sentiment that you would like to share.
I'll start, and again, thank you, Candi, and everyone in the room, Senator Foster and Natalie, for your perspectives. I think I think this is where it starts, as a conversation and strategizing with everybody in the room who cares about this issue, but also just as tribal leaders, whether you're on the conservative side or the progressive side, the choice side or life side. I mean, you have to understand that sovereignty over women's bodies is at the core of it. I think the biggest thing is making sure that we're just protecting all of our citizens, and especially our women, because if we don't do that, especially in this, however you believe on this issue, it's ultimately going to affect our sovereignty one way or another. So that's why we need to kind of be united and figure out a common strategy moving forward. Because again, as tribes, if we're united on this, you also have to realize that there's other states that that lean a certain way that are just as united, and they'll pass, if they don't pass a law here in South Dakota, they'll pass a law in North Dakota or in Wyoming or Nebraska or somewhere like that, and that will affect the rights of tribal. But again, I think it's just important that as tribal leaders, we just stand united, because if we can't be united, there's going to be other states that even if it's not South Dakota, that will pass laws that will affect people. So again, affect your citizens, and just making sure that as tribal leaders, we need to be just united on this issue. Wakalapi.
Thank you, President. Senator Don Foster, if you have any closing statements that you would like to share or further insights.
Thank you again for organizing this, and I appreciate everybody on the panel and their perspective. I think that, as Senator Killer said, it is a great opportunity to really organize, to come together, to have a very high Native turnout in this vote, because that will send a clear message of that people are informed, engaged, we're working together, and collectively are sending a message that our tribal sovereignty is important, who our state leadership is important, and then anticipating that there are going to be a lot of legislation that's coming in to further erode our rights around access to reproductive options. And I think that also stay hopeful, because there are different avenues that we can take to counter this. And so the more informed and engaged we are and collectively working together, it's just the more powerful we'll be. And then also looking at it in a larger context, having these conversations about what we can do locally to recenter our children as being sacred, and making sure that we are creating an environment for our children to thrive, because as I stated before, our children are being used as a mechanism to undermine our tribal sovereignty, and it further gives them the opportunity the more our children are in the foster care system. So I again want to encourage people who are in a position to be a foster parent to look at that, because we have a lot of children that are in need of good homes, and our children deserve to be supported and protected and thrive. And it just strengthens our community to have options, reproductive options that fit our needs and are in our best interest. So thank you again for hosting this panel.
Thank you, Candi, for pulling us together today and hearing from the president and the senator on this very important issue of overturning Roe v. Wade and its implications for us as Indigenous people and for our families. I want to say that here in South Dakota, we do have the Justice Empowerment Network. It is a mutual aid abortion fund to assist in South Dakotan women who are seeking abortion and other type of reproductive justice and health services, both within and outside the state. The Justice Empowerment Network, I recently joined their board of directors. When the draft opinion was issued, it is a group of grassroots Weshitu women who reached out and saw that we need to start creating these alliances here in South Dakota that are working for our people. And I think we also have the Hé Sapa Birth Circle, which is initiated by an activist, a grassroots activist, Zikala Makpiawi, Black Owl. And what they're discussing in that circle is the idea of womb sovereignty, the sovereignty of our wombs themselves. And I think this concept is something that would be very helpful as we frame these discussions going forward to save ourselves and to save our communities right now and into the future. Thank you very much.
Tonka, I am so excited to share throughout our virtual land and, even within our Oyates and the circles through the ACLU South Dakota. Our amazing panel today that definitely is, starting to break through that surface that has long for, over the time, I don't even have the words for it right now, because as we heard from each of our panelists, we have been going back in time, not just from the 50 years, but, centuries and generations from an Indigenous perspective, to the point where, there isn't the words to describe what that is and what this means to us, which is why this panel was extremely important for me to pursue. And, I am very grateful to each of you for your knowledge and your expertise and your continued fight on your daily basis of the work that you're doing. So, I too want to just say Pilamiaye to this Wakalapi Talk, the intention that we're putting out there, and also to the ACLU South Dakota members, volunteers, and folks who are going to start to have these discussions and create space for the Indigenous justice and abortion access needs. So with that said, Wopila Tonka, thank you. I'm Candi Brings Plenty, the Indigenous Justice Organizer for the ACLU South Dakota.